Welcome back, this is Anna of Camellia Fiber Company. So far we've learned to cast on, we've learned to knit, and today we're going to be learning how to purl. So the purl stitch is essentially a backwards knit stitch, and it creates these purl bumps that we saw in our previous video. The difference between purling and knitting is largely where I'm holding my yarn. So with a knit stitch, you may remember we held our yarn in the back of our work. When I'm working my purl stitch, I'm going to bring this yarn around to the front of my work. So I've got my yarn in the front. I'm now going to take my empty right hand needle and start to purl. Instead of going through that front stitch from front to back, I'm going to take my needle and go across the front of the stitch. So I just went through and across the front like this. You can see here that to hold my yarn down below, I'm using my middle finger here to manipulate my working yarn and still holding my tension with my forefinger. So I've got my working yarn down here, my needle has gone through that first stitch, and now I'm gonna pull this yarn over my needle. And again, this needle's sole purpose now is to take that needle and pull it through the other loop. So I've pulled it through, there's my purl stitch. I'm now gonna drop this stitch off my left hand needle, and you can see that little purl bump that I created there. So again, I'm bringing the yarn to the front. So I've got it in front of my left-hand needle, using my middle finger to manipulate it to keep it pulled down there. I'm going to take my right-hand needle, put it through the front of my stitch like this, yarn over with my yarn, and then pull that through that loop, drop that stitch off my left-hand needle. Okay, again, bringing the yarn to the front of my work, using my middle finger to manipulate my yarn, entering the yarn purlwise, yarning over, and then using my right hand needle to pull that loop through, dropping it off my needle. Do that a few more times. So enter purlwise, yarn over, pull that stitch through, pull it off your left hand needle. And that is the purl stitch. So I'm going to purl all the way across my row. And there was my last purl stitch. So I have these purl bumps on the front. On the back of this purl stitch, you're probably guessing, is a knit stitch. So I've got these V's now on the back of my work and the purl stitches on the front of my work. Okay, so we purled across that row. I'm gonna turn my work just like we did when we were knitting and now purl across the other side of my work. So bringing my yarn to the front, and go through that stitch purlwise, yarn over the front, use my needle to pull that through, readjusting my tension a little bit because it was getting a little loose, and then dropping that stitch off. So we'll go across that row, purling. Purling every row still creates that garter stitch that we saw in the previous video when we knit every row, because you still have that alternating texture every row of purl bumps and then knit stitches. When we finish this row, I'm going to show you a different stitch pattern called stockinette, which is produced when you have knit stitches every row. Okay, so I've purled that row, I'm going to turn my work, so I'm back at the front. So to produce this stockinette stitch, since we now know how to knit and purl, since I have these knit stitches on the front of my work here, you can see them there, I'm actually just gonna knit across this entire row because I want in stockinette knit stitches every single row. And stockinette produces that more seamless pattern that you're used to seeing in knitwear, where you have those V's across the entire swatch. So I'm knitting across, we learned this in our last video, so I'm going a little bit faster here. So there is my row of knit stitches. You can see I've got another row of these V's. I'm gonna turn my work. Now I'm on the back of my work. So to produce those knit stitches on the front of my work, I need to actually purl across this row. So I'm gonna purl, create these purl bumps on the back of my work, but knit stitches on the front of my work, which is what I want. I'm gonna purl across. Again, this will be a little bit awkward the first few times that you try. So just do as many rows as you need to until you get a little more comfortable with it. If you need to totally rip out everything that you've done, don't feel bad doing that. It takes starting over a few times to get good at this. All right, so we've purled across this row. Flipping back over to the front, I can now see I've got 3 rows of these knit stitches, and I've got this more seamless pattern that we're used to seeing in knitwear, as opposed to these rows of alternating purl bumps and knit stitches. To get a little more practice with this and to get more comfortable with it, I would go ahead and again knit 5, 10, 20 more rows in this stockinette stitch where you're knitting 1 row, purling 1 row, and then you'll be ready for our next video where we're going to learn to bind off and finish our work. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like and subscribe and tune in for binding off.